So I'm going to start talking in advance of the technical problems being sorted out. I just want to thank, obviously, everyone who's organised the conference, Art Jameel, who've been our collaborator on several projects now, and Otto will explain the last one in detail. But I really, in a way, want to introduce myself because I liked very much Rand's talk at the end of yesterday about heritage management. I started doing the work that Factum has really been developing with Factum's foundation about 20 years ago. And in that time, technology has changed. Many things have changed very, very dramatically. But what's actually happened in a very obvious way is there's been a real separation between the management understanding of what's possible and the application of technology. So I would say there's a very deep crisis of professional heritage management, which I hope everyone in this room can work together to try and stop. I mean, there was a recent example when we were advising a Russian woman who's reorganizing the new Pushkin and trying to introduce technology into the Pushkin Museum. And she smiled and looked at me and she said, you know, Adam, you're a baby boomer. Now it's the digital natives who are in control. And in a way, I think her point is much more truthful and much more important than it seemed superficially. That what we've done in Factum is we've built a workshop in Madrid that's actually developing the technologies. It's writing the software. It's applying them. And these ideas about technology being expensive are only true if you're just buying pre-packaged technologies and then trying to maintain it and operate it. If you're really focusing with the people who know how to make it and then applying it, you can do extraordinary things. And I hope in a second what we'll have is a number of examples that I'll show very briefly. I mean, there's probably about 70 or 80 different projects going on in Factum's workshops at the moment. Otto's going to talk about the last one that was finished in October. Well, it's still ongoing, but it was the first phase was finished in October. There are a number of key issues which, as we heard in the last talk, are really to do with how technology is changing attitudes towards originality, towards sharing, towards the way we engage with the biography of objects, the way actually we shouldn't be talking about objects, we should be talking about subjects. Every object tells great stories, and that's really its chief value. So if you can get inside the material evidence that is the object, you can read thoughts that are not your own, you can understand things that come from perspectives that are not your own. Can I go? So I think we're almost there. That was my preamble while you were all talking amongst yourselves. But I'm going to look now very, very quickly at 4 projects before I hand over to Otto to talk about the technology. So really, the critical thing that happens in Factum is management is very light, and the teams are working together. So the metaphor, if you want, is like a Renaissance studio, where different people are doing different things, but working together to try to solve a series of problems that I think affect every different presentation that I've seen over the last 2 days. How are we doing? So, where are we at? I'm happy to do it like this as long as it works and as long as you can play the video at the end. Okay, that'll do. So the first project I want to touch on is the Theban Necropolis Preservation Initiative. I started working with Michael Melanson back in the Valley of the Kings in 2001 in the tomb of Seti I. The Theban Necropolis Preservation Initiative is now being run with the University of Basel. And if you... I didn't touch anything. Sorry, this is mad now. Excuse me. I haven't touched anything. It began in 2009 when we recorded the tomb of well, in fact, I mean, we'd already recorded the tomb of Tutmosis III, but we recorded in 2009 the tomb of Tutankhamun, and we've been recording since 2014 the tomb of Seti I, the largest and most important tomb in the Valley of the Kings. And I have a series of publications here, if any of you would like to take a look, that explain some of the issues that lie behind it. But in the first slide, when it appears, you can see a Hassan Fatih building, Stoppelair House, on the top of the hill. So this is standing in Howard Carter's house looking towards the Valley of the Kings. The entrance to the burial chamber of Tutankhamun. The bottom image is the facsimile, not the original tomb. So it's quite possible now to record high-resolution data at low cost and transfer the skills completely to local communities. So Abdu here is explaining the importance of 3D scanning for epigraphy to the Minister of Antiquities. And at the bottom, Tariq Wali, who restored the whole of Stoppelair House, is explaining how the building is being transformed into a center for training and archiving and teaching. So we now have a team on the ground who we supply manuals so they can build the 3D scanners from scratch, and they've now translated the manuals into Arabic. So the aim is to supply the technologies to teach, to support, and to maintain. The whole of these projects are all done without any public funding. So the team, this is Alia Ismail, who's one of our trainees, working with, in this case, I think it's Musa is on the camera, and she was there with Pedro. There's always one Factum person, but increasingly Alia will be running that project completely. But outside of Egypt, we've now recorded all known objects from the rooms that we've worked in the tomb of Seti I. And this is the team using new technologies to build in 3 dimensions, accurate to 100 microns, the sarcophagus of Seti I. And I won't go into all the technologies because they belong elsewhere. In Dagestan, so we're not picking the easiest places to work, we're trying to pick the most complex. In Dagestan, we're running a number of projects, from the recording of the tombstones in Kalakoresh, which were done entirely by two of Factum's young team, with 2 Dagestani trainees brought in by the Perry Foundation, who we just heard were working with the V&A. But what I love is the way a project, when it starts, develops very clearly. And here, we realized there was a need to record the state archive. So we've built a portable manuscript scanning system and a fixed one that in 12 months has recorded half the state archive. It's recorded over 1,000 manuscripts, on average 800 pages, at 700 DPI at 1:1, and downloaded and archived all the data. In Nigeria, we're looking at some of the really pressing issues about how technology can serve long-term preservation. So we're in a time where everyone's talking about restitution, but we want to focus the subject on preservation. on how these objects can rise above political expediency. And this is an example of recording one of the icon monoliths on site, and we know this monolith was complete in 1969. Talking with the local chiefs, we found the top half, which is in the Met. It entered the Met in New York in 1994. And then we started asking questions. So when did these stones leave the country? When did these carved monoliths go out of Cross River State? And the answer is the one on the left in Quai Branly entered Quai Branly in the 90s. The two in the middle we found recently in Belgium with a dealer. We know he's got more. And the one on the right I've just tracked down to the Israel Museum. We've now recorded all the monoliths we've been able to find outside of Nigeria at high resolution. So everyone who knows me well in all the time we've been doing this knows that I can be incredibly boring on the subject of resolution. So too many phrases are used too cheaply. High resolution is sub-millimetric. Anything else is not. So this is a very, very important start to define terms. But really I want to end before I hand over to Otto to talk about the technology of what happens on the ground and how you can train and do things deeply effectively. We heard about the attempt to wipe out cultural memory. In September, we sent a team to record the sacred cave of the Kikuru and Wauja people in Upper Jingu in Mato Grosso in Brazil. And when we got there, the entire surface of the petroglyphs, which are one of the few examples of material evidence in the region, so the indigenous communities don't have many examples of material evidence, but this is the cave that contains the creation myths, and it's been totally systematically vandalized. What we're doing now is working with the Wauja community and with the anthropologists who've worked on the cave in the past, and we're reconstructing. Here you can hardly see it, but because we have certainly millimetric accurate data, in some cases less, I mean more less than 1 millimeter, we're able to completely reconstruct. So it'll never make the cave an original again, but it will mean that we can restore the data that's been lost so it can go on serving its function to transfer stories from one generation to the next, which is the vital importance of cultural heritage and why we try and preserve it. I got one more slide. So to introduce Otto, Otto first went with the House of Traditional Arts with Jameel to Jeddah to do a training session with Pedro Miro, who's one of, again, I mean, I've been doing this now for 20 years. Pedro's been with me since we started. And Pedro's one of the very brilliant, inspired, both teachers and practitioners. And Otto and Pedro basically taught a group of 10 people in Jeddah to record the decorated features and architectural features in Al-Balad. And that led to the next project, which Otto will describe now.
So the next project that we did with Art Jameel, and this time collaborating as well with the Royal Commission of Al-Ula, was to go to the town of Al-Ula and to train a group of local people in how to do photogrammetry and how to record the petroglyphs that are all over the entire province. So basically we had we launched some adverts and asked for people to volunteer to come on this 2-week workshop. We received a staggering 74 applications to join, but since it was just me teaching them, I didn't feel I could teach that many. So we ended up with 16, which is still a large amount to teach photogrammetry. None of these people had any experience in 3D recording before, and a small number of them, particularly the 5 men, were local photographers. And so we held in Al-Ula, we held a 2-day workshop inside, basically going through how to record using photogrammetry. And here I have to thank Art Jameel for providing us with Fatima, who was my translator and logistics person during this project, and she was absolutely fantastic and couldn't have done it without her. I felt I had to say something for Antonia there. But basically, after the 2 days in the workshop, I felt that we could start going out to record things. So we recorded at 3 different sites over the 2-week period. Here in the middle, you see Chardon Resort, which is where the workshop had taken place. And then the 3 pins represent the 3 different sites. You'll notice only one of them is named, and that's because the other 2 had only just been surveyed by archaeologists, and so they didn't have an official name for them. Jabal Ikma, on the other hand, has been closed to the public, while the Royal Commission tries to find a way of introducing tourism to the region in a sustainable fashion. So the site of Jabal Ikma is also known as the Library of Lihyan, and that's because it's filled with writing from the Lihyanite kingdom, which is the pre-Islamic, pre-Nabatean kingdom in this region of Saudi Arabia. And it's called the library because it seems that they congregated here to write down laws and financial transactions and all kinds of agreements. So this particular site is a very good insight into these people, who we actually have very little written knowledge about. So what you see on the top left is a scan that I got the students to do of the entire valley. So this is a very, very general scan, and the idea is that they then do further in-detail things, in-detail scans on writings, on specific writings that are of importance, because there's so much in this site and we have a limited hard drive space and a limited processing capability, so we have to work with what we have. So we decided to particularly focus on this one rock, which is there a pointer I can use here? Which is this rock here. So I got the students to devote particular attention to this rock. And I should probably explain here a little bit about photogrammetry, although I know many of you are very familiar with it. That basically, photogrammetry works by taking overlapping images to create a 3D model. So you run it through software which recognizes features in each image, normally around between 40,000 and 100,000, let's say, and then it can match those features up with the features that it has detected in the other images, and then using trigonometry, basically, it can triangulate where each of those features go in a 3-dimensional space. So basically, the more pictures you take of an object, the better. So the entire site is around 1,000 images for the entire site. Then we have a further 800 on top of that, devoted to the surface of the rock. And here we have the end 3D model of the rock. And just to go even further and illustrate the quality of the scan done by these students after just 2 days workshop, remember, we have here a even further closer up on the writing on the face of the rock. Also from Jabal Ikma, we have here an illustration of a different section of the site, showing the difference between having the color information included and where you've taken off the color information to reveal just the surface data of the rock. And this is quite useful because often color can hide quite a number of things. So especially with this kind of writing that's very, very shallow and very old, it often your eye misses things which become clearly visible when you strip away the color. So in this case here, you have all of this writing down here, which is much less visible to the naked eye up here, which, whoops, that wasn't, all right, it's back. So basically this is a very useful tool for analysis of the stone after the scan, and is a good example of the reasons, one of the reasons why we do this type of 3D recording, and why it's so necessary to have such a good, such a high level of accuracy. I've been told I have only a few minutes left, so I'll try and speed up a little bit. So site 2, this was the second site we recorded. This is a very recently discovered site by the archaeologists. And when you go to the region, you see why so many things are left undiscovered, because there's writing everywhere, all through the canyons in the region. So this was the second site, and again, I got the students to do a very similar thing, which was basically recording the rock inscriptions on the cliff and presenting it as both color information and depth information. This last site that we did was by far the largest, and I think this one also deserves to be called the library, because it's covered in inscriptions not just in Lycianite, but also in other languages such as Dedanite, and also very, very pre-old, some of it pre-Islamic Arabic, and also Aramaic. And basically here, it was a similar method. So we have here the scan of the whole valley. And actually, this section here is on the other side of this corner. And so I focused it down to this area here, which had a particularly large cluster of writings. And this is the depth information of that area. Now, you can't see it here, but this is covered in writing. And so I focused it down to a little square about in this corner here. And just to illustrate the quality of the data that these students recorded, here we have that tiny square. This is about 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters. And what I've done here is I have basically done a little trick, which is where you can, basically in the rendering software, you can bounce the light in a particular direction, in this case, from the top right corner strafing down, to bring out the writing a lot more clearly. And as a demonstration of the quality of the data that these students managed to record in this 2-week workshop, here we've routed a section of this piece of data 1-to-1 in polyurethane. So basically, the fact that you can route this data accurately to an accuracy of 100 microns, that's 1/10 of a millimeter, illustrates that this data is of excellent quality, and it can be used to monitor the condition of the sites. These sites are basically open to anyone to come and write on and draw on, and people do. And if it's okay, I'd like to play a small video now for the well, this was commissioned by the Royal Commission to illustrate the project.
الحقيقة الدورة هذه تعتبر نقلة نوعية لنا كمصورين، لأنه ما قد طبقنا هالأسلوب هذا أو التقنية هذه في توثيق الأماكن الأثرية في محافظة الأولى.
So the main object of the workshop is to teach photogrammetry to local people, basically. It's a technology transfer. So the object is to be able to get them to have the know-how and the ability to record their own cultural heritage and not have to rely on outsiders such as myself or archaeologists, because at the end of the day it's local people who know where a lot of these things are, and they know what's important to them and how likely something is to be destroyed in a way that an outsider can't.
أكثر شيء حبيت أطوره التصوير والرسم. حالياً دخلت الدورة حقت الهيئة الملكية مع فن جميل، والحمد لله يعني في أشياء شفتها أنا ما كنت أعرفها من أول، يعني مثلاً الأماكن، كيف أصور، طريقة أخذ مسح.
تعرفنا على مصورات ومصورين ودخلوا المجال وحبوا المجال، كوننا فريق عمل جيد، استمتعنا قبل كل شيء إنه تعلمنا شيء جديد وكلهم كانوا متحمسين للشيء.
طبعا بدايتها كانت طريقة نظرية، شرح لنا عن طريقة الأداء في التصوير، وبعد كده أخذنا برنامج أو طريقة التطبيق العملي بشكل مبسط، وبعد كده انتقلنا إلى منطقة أثرية اللي هي منطقة حكمة، والموقع اللي احنا فيه الآن هذا موقع بعود، وبدينا نطبق النظريات أو الأسلوب اللي أعطاني إياه الأستاذ إيتو.
My first impression was being overwhelmed, that there is so much here to record. You have lots of writing all over the place. It's a nice place to be able to teach a large group in how to record these sorts of writings.
طبعا التكنيك اللي استخدمناه في التوثيق أو في الدورة هذه هو أخذ أجزاء الواجهة الصخرية، نأخذها أجزاء بشكل عمودي وبشكل أفقي، يعني نأخذ أكثر من 50 إلى 60 صورة لكل 3 متر تقريبا، وبعد كذا يتم دمجها مع بعضها بحيث أنها تكون الواجهة كاملة.
منطقة جدا رائعة، أهلها كتير رائعين، فاتحين منطقتهم وبيتهم وقلوبهم للكل. أنا بدها الكل إنه يجوا يزوروا منطقة العلا.
واحنا في الهيئة نرحب بكل من لديه القدرة على تقديم مثل هذه الورشات ويمتلك الخبرة وأيضا التعاون الدولي والمحلي في التطوير وفي التدريب وفي تمهيد الشباب والبنات لهم يصبحون صانعين المستقبل وهم مستقبل العلم.